At first glance, it seems like a normal horror story, doesn't it? But everything is not as it seems. Now get your coffee ready. Let's begin. My name is Christopher. Although it happened years ago, I honestly forgot about it until recently. But I was 17 that summer. That summer, I worked evenings at a pizza place outside my hometown. Although I didn't enjoy it, I couldn't complain because I had no money and my family would kill me if I didn't. It was one of those jobs you do when there are no other options. Clingy clothes, slow shifts, and a clunky delivery truck that barely even climbs hills. At least I didn't have to drive my own car. It would have been awful. Yes, absolutely. I have to say the pizza was awful, even though it had nothing to do with anything. I mean, it was truly awful. I couldn't understand how you could make such a terrible pizza. Honestly, I still can't understand why any sane person would order from there. Without the technology they provided and their generally optimistic attitude, I seriously doubt we would have even finished a single purchase. The place where I grew up is the place I miss the most. And that's saying something. Because customers rarely ordered from us. Either the pizza was terrible, or the location was too far from the city center, or perhaps it was a combination of the two. The one advantage of working there was that most evenings were quiet. I won't bore you with the mundane details of my typical evening routine. But there was a pizzeria. Sure, you could fill in the blanks yourself. One evening, as I was stocking the fridge with drinks, my tablet buzzed with an online order. A massive pizza topped with ham and olives. The name was nice, but the taste was awful. I distinctly remember not having any olives. I remember being forced to refuse the address out of habit because it was outside our delivery area and in the middle of nowhere. We hadn't been out for a run in over an hour, so my manager, Russell, a 30-something who usually sat in the back reading Reddit, leaned over and nudged me to pick up the pizza. I didn't try to argue. When the pizza was ready, I entered the directions into my phone and picked it up. Even if nothing else, it would have taken me 30 or 40 minutes. I'd seen the delivery instructions just as I was leaving the store and about to get in the car, so after Russell had printed them out and stapled them to the box, I looked at them more closely. I remember exactly: park in the alley behind the house. Take a walk in the backyard. Knock on the back door. My 17-year-old brain had come up with several plausible reasons why someone wouldn't want me to use the front door, but it still piqued my interest. Perhaps they didn't want to wake an elderly person or a small child. They might have been renovating their front door. They might have wanted to hide the delivery from their parents or spouses. There are a few explanations, actually. I was thinking about how still the night was and how long it would take to pack the boxes. I decided to take care of my responsibilities. But the moment I stepped outside, I started to change my mind. It was like walking through soup on one of those steamy evenings. The air was stifling, humid, and completely silent. It was as if the very air itself was coated with a barely perceptible substance. I'm not sure if this makes sense, but when the air is still outside and really humid, you get that sour, stale smell. Like sun-baked earth and old plastic. That smell was heavy in the air. It was inevitable, but I hate that smell more than anything. I left the windows open for about 2 minutes before giving up and turning on the air conditioner. The delivery address wasn't downtown. The pizza business was already going in a slightly different direction, but it was actually going in the opposite direction. The drive was supposed to be just over 25 minutes, but the roads were empty, so it felt longer. I definitely went too far. The crowds thinned out as the drive progressed, but it wasn't as if there weren't any houses for miles. When I finally arrived home, I realized I was following people. The GPS directed me down a small, narrow alley, a series of backyards. There were no lights on the back porches of the houses, no streetlights either. Everything was in shadow. I remember pulling over and double-checking the house number because it looked so dull. There were no cars in the driveway, and no lights inside either. The backyard was falling apart, the grass was overgrown, and the fence was made of thin wood that wouldn't close completely. Still, I did as I was told. I parked on the gravel shoulder right there, picked up the pizza, and climbed the hill to the back door. To avoid tripping over anything, I held the pizza in one hand and aimed my flashlight at my feet. When I reached the top, I noticed the back door. It was one of those old white doors. A thin curtain covered the small glass partition at the top. I waited and knocked, but no one answered. Knowing my manager would be upset if I returned empty-handed, I knocked again. When I got no answer, I was about to knock a third time when I saw the curtain change. The only movement was a slight flick, as if someone had touched it with a finger. I don't think I would have noticed how quickly things were happening if I hadn't been looking at the window. After waiting a few more seconds, I saw the person standing clearly behind the door finally open it. But before he could, I noticed two unmarked cars approaching the alley behind my car. At first, I thought I was about to get a ticket for trespassing or something. One of the car's doors opened, and someone got out. Even from home, I could see it was a man by the headlights of the other car. When he moved to approach me, I assumed he'd ordered pizza and that I'd somehow beat him to it on my way home from work. But as he got closer, I realized he was holding something out to me. It was a badge. Because the man wasn't in uniform and was neatly dressed, I was able to identify him as an undercover officer. When I got within a certain distance, he told me to return to my car and wait there. That was it. That's all he said. So I did. I slowly backed away, climbed into the delivery van, and looked from afar. That's when I realized there were more than 2 officers. There were at least 5. They all had flashlights, but none of them spoke. They were skulking around the house as if trying to blend in. It seemed odd that none of them knocked or made an announcement. It was a rather peculiar scene. I remember one of the officers gently testing the doorknob of the back door I just knocked on. When the door didn't open, he nodded to one of the other men and walked away. It felt like I was witnessing something I wasn't supposed to see, and I guess I was. After a while, the first officer came back to my car and leaned against the window. When I rolled down the window, he glanced at the pizza box in the passenger seat and sighed softly. While he didn't seem like a joker, he was a bit evasive when he told me, as he didn't want to give too much information away. He explained that the investigation was still ongoing and that he and other police officers were looking around. He apologized for taking so long to get in and claimed I'd arrived while he was relocating his car. When I asked if he wanted to see the delivery order, he cut me off. I opened it on the delivery app and realized it wasn't working. It had Jerry's name, a delivery address, and a phone number, but he didn't seem very helpful. The officer read the order, wrote down the number, and told me to leave immediately. When I told him how angry I was and that my boss would kill me for returning the pizza, he just shrugged. He ordered me out of the car again and started walking away. I was furious, but there was nothing I could do, so I drove away. It took me the whole drive to fully grasp the situation. It wasn't until I got out of the car that I realized how dire it was. If the police hadn't intervened in time, something terrible could have happened. I don't know what happened. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the person who refused to open the door to get the pizza was most likely afraid of the police. But why would anyone order pizza if they were being watched? Perhaps the person in the house wasn't aware they were being watched. Or maybe they were, and I was just a test drive. Perhaps I served as bait to test whether the police were watching that side of the house or leaving. The timing, the silence, the sliding curtain. I'm not sure. However, I realized there was never a reason for what happened. Revisiting the experience is often pointless. If one of my high school friends hadn't brought it up last week, I probably would have forgotten it entirely. I didn't even remember it at first. It's probably better that way, but I wanted to share it here before I forget again. It's only been a few years. I have 2 sons, ages 5 and 7, and I'm 40 and married. I work in insurance, which sounds boring because it is, but at this point in my life, stability is all that matters to me. My father battled cancer for a long time before he passed away a few years ago. He left me a beachfront property in Delaware that I had never seen before, as he rented it out year-round. It's not huge or fancy, but it's in a great location, just a block from the coastline. My favorite feature is the high back porch with its beautiful view of the ocean. After my grandfather passed away, we started using it as a retreat, going there every summer, a week here, a weekend there. It's become a small family tradition. When my wife and I visit, the kids enjoy it even more than we do. They play on the beach, ride their bikes, and spend hours exploring the city. My father left it for us to enjoy, and it feels like a gift. This story happened during 1 week last summer. It was mid-July, a Sunday through Friday trip. The beach was a bit quieter, and the crowds thinned out as the week progressed. I remember the evening vividly. It was a Wednesday. After a long, sunny day, the kids had fallen asleep around 9:30 p.m., and my wife and I were on the back porch drinking wine and playing cards. Our oldest son, Jordan, came out then. His expression was uneasy. He said a scratching noise he heard in his room was keeping him up. After a quick glance at my wife, I put down my drink and told her I'd go check it out. I assumed it was just a normal household noise. After all, the house was pretty old. Since the kids didn't share a room, I didn't think there was any need to wake up our younger son. Jordan pointed to the wall next to his bed, signaling me to stay quiet as I followed him into his room. I stood there for a while and didn't hear anything at first, but I didn't want him to think I didn't trust him, so I decided to wait a bit longer. After about 20 seconds, I heard it. It was subtle at first, but definitely there. A faint scraping sound, exactly as he had described. I leaned over and pressed my ear to the wall. It didn't sound like an animal moving over the rafters. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere below, near the baseboards, and through the wall. At that moment, I heard breathing. It wasn't a monster. Absolutely not. It was a slow, deep human breath. As I pulled back, I involuntarily let out a sharp gasp. Then, I kid you not, the most terrifying scream I've ever heard came from inside the wall. A guttural, furious scream. I was so shocked that I cried out again, a wave of existential dread washing over me. I grabbed Jordan's arm and dragged him out of the room. We raced down the hall to get my younger son, Scott, who was still asleep. I didn't even wait for him to wake up. I scooped him up and ran. My wife was out on the terrace. All I could think was that I had to get to her. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, I called out to her. Then, from somewhere behind me, much closer this time, I heard another scream. When I looked back, I saw a filthy man running down the hallway toward us. I nearly stumbled trying to climb the stairs with both boys in my arms, but we made it up just in time. Less than 2 seconds later, I slammed the sliding door shut, and the man crashed into it hard. I honestly thought it would break. He started clawing at the glass like an animal, banging and screaming, yelling things I won't repeat. My hands. I told my wife to grab the kids and call the police, while I threw my weight against the door. She pulled them out of sight and covered their ears. I kept my eyes on him, trying to block their view. He was manic, completely out of control. His hand was smeared with something, blood, dirt, I don't even know. As he tried to force the door open, the substance smeared across the glass. I don't know how long I held the door. 5 minutes felt like an eternity. Despite all my strength, the man never let up. He seemed tireless. My only concern was keeping my family safe. If the window cracked, I was ready to fight him. Thankfully, the police arrived just in time. They must have come from the side, because as soon as they entered the house, I saw 2 officers rush toward the man, who was still pounding on the door. One tackled him from behind, while the other restrained him. The rest of that night is a blur. After they hauled him away and into the back of the squad car, I gave the officers my version of events. The 3 of us inspected the house, trying to figure out how the man had gotten in and out so quickly. That's when we discovered something I didn't know. The house had a crawl space. You wouldn't even see the entrance unless you were looking for it. It was under the back porch. The second access point was a loose panel in Jordan's closet. It led into a standing crawl space that ran alongside the foundation. I had no idea it even existed. When I inherited the place, I never really inspected it. Hell, I didn't even think to renovate. A detective followed up a few days later and gave me more details. He said the man confessed to living in the crawl space for months. He had discovered it during the off-season and considered it his new home. He admitted he had planned to hurt us that night because we had invaded it. We later realized he had been stealing food from our kitchen and rummaging through neighbors' trash cans. We didn't return to the house for the rest of the summer, not out of fear of another incident, but because of the trauma. When I told my wife and kids we wouldn't be going back for a long time, they didn't protest. I eventually hired a crew to completely seal up the crawl space. Only then was I able to breathe again. This summer, we've started using the house again, and I'm happy to report that everything is back to normal, or as close as it gets. I was raised in a rather remote region where you could go miles on a bike without encountering anyone. Many people agree that summer was always my favorite season. In actuality, it still is, although summer has lost some of its allure since I last lived in the country. Life in the middle of nowhere is largely responsible for the specialness of summer for me. I was drawn to the warmth, silence, and nothingness for some reason. I was never able to locate it in the city. It's difficult to describe, but I felt incredibly alone, in a wonderful way. I felt as though I had the entire planet to myself, as if no one would notice if I vanished for several hours. The greatest evenings were always in the summer. The young girl I used to be sought a sense of independence and seclusion, which the darkness enhanced. At the time, I was 16. Taylor was a buddy of mine at the time. She constantly pushed the boundaries in tiny ways and was a bit more careless than I was. We made the spontaneous decision to go stargazing one July evening. 2 bikes, a bottle of wine, and us. This was not the first time we had taken this action. In fact, we did that fairly frequently, until what I'm going to tell you occurs, that is. As it turns out, this was most likely one of our final stargazing excursions. We just had a direction, not a detailed strategy. The previous locations were becoming a touch monotonous, so we decided to try something different. Taylor claimed to know a nice location outside of town, a desolate area of countryside where no one would ever bother us. We departed at approximately 10 in the evening. We may have ridden for 20 or 30 minutes, but I'm not sure. However, we continued until we had passed all traces of civilization. Taylor quickly stopped her bike at one point and informed me that we had arrived. It felt ideal, even though I wasn't entirely sure what this meant because there weren't any landmarks that provided context. An expansive field with no fences, houses, or cows, just a vast expanse of grass and the unending starry sky. We laid down a blanket and used the little cork popper Taylor had miraculously managed to pack. Although the inexpensive red wine didn't taste very good, it served its purpose. For a time, we lay there, pointing out the few constellations we could name by passing the bottle back and forth. On evenings like this, We always had the same objective: attempt to identify a shooting star. When Taylor asked me once if I believed we would actually see one, I told her that I probably didn't, but to keep searching nevertheless. Even if they're more abundant in the country, where there are a lot of stars to sight, you still need to pay attention. But whether we were seeing shooting stars or not, we were enjoying the evening. The wine was undoubtedly having its effect, and I began to feel like I was becoming wasted. It was the type of night when time seemed to stand still, similar to what I was discussing previously. I'll tell you this fast even though it has little to do with the plot, because it's one of the few things I recall from the evening. A very short period of time seemed to be a pause in the night's rhythm. As we leaned back, Taylor gave me a look that made me question whether she was looking for something more than just friendship. Although I always suspected her as a child, my suspicions were always fueled by curiosity. However, it felt a bit stronger that night than I could remember it ever being. I remained silent and didn't inquire. There was just no open discussion of that type of stuff where we grew up. Furthermore, I could have been reading too much into things since I was intoxicated. In any case, it went by. We laughed about something stupid, and then she glanced up in time to see a streak of shooting stars in the sky. Anyone familiar with shooting stars is aware of the involuntary reaction they cause. You can't help but laugh or yell into the night, for example. After we both started laughing, Taylor instructed me to make a wish. I cannot recall what it was. Most likely something dumb. Feeling slightly happier after viewing the shooting star, we sat back and spoke for a few more minutes. I briefly closed my eyes to allow myself to feel the air on my face and get more absorbed in the silence, not to go to sleep. I promised that I never closed my eyes for more than 5 seconds. However, Taylor was not there when I opened them. As in gone. Not merely using her phone or going to the bathroom. Even though my bike was still parked just next to the blanket, I could tell she was truly gone because neither she nor her bike were visible. I quickly sat up, wondering whether she was playing a practical joke on me. However, I was unable to see her even after doing a complete 360-degree round. I had an inexplicable wave of terror at that very moment. The serene allure of the night gave way to terror, as the deserted field where I was seated seemed oppressive. The stars appeared fainter. I can't forget that portion. Even though the sky was still there, it seemed strange, as if someone had smeared something on it or reduced its brightness. Additionally, the air felt cooler. It felt as though I had entered a new version of the same location, rather than one that had naturally cooled. As I mentioned, the emotion was inexplicable, yet I realize I'm not making any sense. I took out my phone to see what time it was. It was precisely 3 a.m. That moment is ingrained in my mind and most likely always will be. To be sure my mind wasn't playing tricks on me, I had to blink a few times. A few minutes before, it hadn't even been midnight. I wondered whether I had fallen asleep because I kept looking at the clock on my phone. Though I couldn't be certain, I knew I hadn't. But would Taylor actually abandon me there by myself? There was no way, even if I had dozed off. That is not something she would have done in a million years. I got up, turned around, and repeatedly yelled her name, but she didn't respond. I was at a loss for what to think. She had abandoned me for whatever reason, and it was the only plausible explanation. She could have become irritated or went off and left me unconscious, but I couldn't tell. The atmosphere had been positive, and we hadn't argued. Really nice. I also made many calls to her phone, but none of them were answered. I started crying after that. Can you really blame me, after all? I was at a loss for what to do. Trying not to worry, I picked up my bike and began pedaling back towards my house. It seemed like the ride went on forever. I think that was the scariest thing I had ever experienced when riding a bike. I continued till I returned to my driveway, exhausted and yet unable to comprehend what had transpired. I fell asleep right away. I texted Taylor as soon as I woke up the next day, anticipating an apology or at the very least an explanation, but she insisted on getting one. "Where the hell did you go last night?" she questioned me word for word. I recalled telling her how I had woken up by myself at 3 in the morning, thinking she had abandoned me, but then she hit me with the item that prompted me to submit the tale. She said that I was the one who had left at 3 in the morning and that she had woken up by herself. After more than an hour of waiting for me, She assumed I had become irritated and abandoned her, so she rode her bike home in confusion and anger. She said I simply disappeared, and I was equally certain that the opposite occurred. We spent some time attempting to piece things together, but nothing made sense. Beyond that point, none of us had any memory lapses. Neither of us had any calls, messages, or other information that would have allowed us to piece together what really transpired. Despite the fact that we both vowed to recall phoning one another as soon as we woke up, neither of our phone logs showed any of those erroneous calls. We finally dropped it, or at least we ceased discussing it. However, I believe that we were both far more afraid than we wanted to acknowledge. I'm certain I was. I would lie in bed for months, reliving that night while gazing out my window at the sky. After that night, Taylor and I didn't spend much time stargazing. Possibly once or twice. Things did, in a way, return to normal. That was all. We carried on with our lives. However, I still don't have an explanation for anything that occurred that evening. Everyone instantly attributes this narrative to something supernatural, even though I wouldn't describe myself as superstitious or paranormal. And I don't particularly enjoy thinking about it, even though they could be correct. I do entertain the idea that she may have just told me a lie. In any case, I have a very uneasy sense that something occurred to us that evening that I might never fully understand for the rest of my life. Even though I haven't spoken to Taylor in years, I'm willing to wager that she occasionally still ponders what transpired that July evening in the field. Can you stay home alone? Your opinion will change after watching this video.